Coming up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon, in the first presidential office gathering of its kind, President Park Geun-hye is meeting with parliamentary leaders from the ruling and opposition parties to discuss ways to radically overhaul the government. Despite calls from top policymakers to take steps to boost domestic demand, the central bank keeps its key interest rate unchanged. Thus, Argentina beats the Netherlands 4-2 on penalties after the two sides play out a scoreless 120 minutes. The South Americans take on Germany in Sunday's final. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's noon Thursday, July 10th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. We start at the nation's top office. Now, in a likely attempt to revive communication with the opposition party, President Park Geun-hye has invited the ruling and opposition party floor leaders and policy chiefs to the presidential office for the first time, in fact, since taking office early last year.
At Thursday's meeting, the president, who has been criticized for her lack of cooperation with the opposition side, positively assessed weekly meetings between the two rival parties' floor leadership. President Park was expected to ask for bipartisan support behind her government and public sector reform-related bills put forth in the aftermath of April's ferry disaster, as well as a series of economy and welfare-related bills. The opposition side was expected to raise concerns over President Park's recent personnel appointment failures and request that she withdraw some of her controversial cabinet nominations. And with only 3 weeks left until crucial by-elections, the nation's two main political parties are gearing up for a rematch after no clear winner emerged in last month's local elections. 15 parliamentary seats will be up for grabs. Ji Myung-gil has more on the upcoming by-elections.
The race for the July 30th parliamentary by-elections got underway Thursday with 2 days of candidate registration at the National Election Commission. 15 assembly seats are up for grabs, the largest number in Korea's by-election history. Campaigning will officially start on July 17th and continue for 2 weeks until Election Day. For Korea's two main political parties, the by-elections will be far more than an opportunity to expand their presence in the National Assembly, as neither one emerged as a clear victor after local elections on June 4th. Currently, the ruling Saenuri Party holds 147 of the 300 parliamentary seats, while the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy has 126. The ruling party is vying to gain a majority of the vacant assembly seats, while the main opposition party is looking to garner a win in the important constituencies in Seoul and the surrounding Gyeonggi-do province. Seoul's Dongjak-bi district is considered strategically important to both parties, as the district's parliamentary seat is not only in the heart of Seoul, but is the former district of 7-term lawmaker and Saenuri heavyweight Chung Mong-jun. Experts say that as the 15 constituencies are spread around the nation, with 6 being in the metropolitan area, including 1 in Seoul, the mini general election could act as a referendum on the government. In appealing to voters, the Saenuri Party will emphasize the need for a national reform drive and supporting the president, while the unified opposition party will continue to highlight government's mishandling of April's ferry tragedy. But unless the main opposition party can provide viable alternatives to the ruling party's policies, neither party will have a clear advantage. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
North Korea has proposed a round of working-level talks with South Korea next week to discuss its plans to send athletes and a cheering squad to the Incheon Asian Games this fall. North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency reported Thursday it proposed holding the talks in the inter-Korean border village of Panmunjom next Tuesday. North Korea said earlier this week it would send a cheering squad to the upcoming Asian Games in South Korea's port city of Incheon, slated for September. in an effort to improve inter-Korean relations. If a North Korean cheering squad were to participate in the Incheon Asian Games, it would be the first such dispatch by the regime in 9 years.
The top diplomats of the US and China are holding their second day of talks in Beijing on this Thursday on a range of issues, including cybersecurity, maritime disputes, the Chinese currency, and an investment treaty. The two sides opened their annual meeting by emphasizing the potential for cooperation. But issues that divide the world's two biggest economies reportedly dominated their discussions on the first day of the meeting on Wednesday. Hwang Sang-hee reports.
Chinese President Xi Jinping opened the annual China-U.S. Strategic and Economic Dialogue on Wednesday by addressing the differences between their two countries. Stressing that confrontation would be a disaster, Xi reiterated calls for a new model relationship.
China-U.S. confrontation to the two countries and the world would definitely be a disaster. Under these circumstances, we on both sides should look far into the distance, strengthen and persist on cooperation, and avoid confrontation.
The two-day talks in Beijing include discussions on China's currency, North Korea's nuclear program, and China's maritime disputes with its neighbors. Washington, which has been critical of Beijing's territorial claims, said it welcomes a peaceful emergence of China.
The United States does not seek to contain China. We welcome the emergence of a peaceful, stable, prosperous China.
But the two sides had clear differences on the establishment of the China-led Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Washington views it as Beijing's attempt to dominate the Asian currency market. This divide poses a problem to South Korea. It received a Chinese invitation to join the bank upon President Xi's visit to Seoul last week. With no clear answer given just yet, the matter is reportedly under discussion in South Korea, as the U.S. opposes its key ally taking part in any China-led project that could alter the political landscape in Northeast Asia. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
The United States has confirmed North Korea fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea. The latest launches on Wednesday, Korea time, marks Pyongyang's 13th projectile launch this year alone. A U.S. official said the firing violates numerous UN Security Council resolutions which ban the North from any ballistic missile activity. State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki also voiced Washington's concerns, saying such provocative acts heighten tension in the region and will not provide North Korea with the prosperity and security it claims it wants. The official urged Pyongyang to refrain from provocations and stick to its international obligations and commitments. Now, North Korea might want to think again before test firing any more ballistic missiles in the coming years, at least, because the U.S. Navy says its latest defense system could potentially knock them out of the sky in the blink of an eye. Kim Yeon-bin reports.
The U.S. Navy has unveiled the latest in state-of-the-art missile defense, called a railgun. This long-range weapon can fire projectiles using electricity generated from the ship instead of gunpowder. The $250 million project is expected to change modern American warfare. The projectile itself weighs over 10 kilograms and can travel at 7 times the speed of sound. And is powerful as well. Navy officials say the impact is equivalent to a freight train smashing into a building at 160 kilometers an hour.
It can shoot down ballistic missiles. It can shoot down very advanced cruise missiles. It can shoot down fast-moving aircraft. It's extremely safe, and it's extremely effective.
Electromagnetic force accelerates the missile to Mach 7.5 and has a range of 185 kilometers. The beauty is not only the precision, but the cost. The projectiles only cost $25,000, a fraction of the price of a traditional missile.
At the end of the day, they can throw anything in the sky at us, and we'll be able to knock it out of the sky.
The railgun will undergo further testing through 2016 before it becomes fully operational in 2018. Kim Yeon-bin, Arirang News.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea. Connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju.
Market researcher Strategy Analytics said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about 11. Now, Korea's central bank has left its key interest rate unchanged at 2.5% for the 14th straight month in July. This despite market expectations for a rate cut following the nomination of a pro-growth finance minister.
Right, and for more, we connect live to our Hwang Jie standing by at the Bank of Korea. Jie, the bank also cut its growth outlook for this year. Tell us about that.
Yes, Jinju, the central bank cut its growth outlook by 0.2 percentage points to 3.8% for this year, and it also cut 0.2 percentage points to 4% for next year. The revision is largely due to the negative impact the ferry tragedy in April had on the nation's already sluggish domestic demand. But experts say the trimming of its growth forecast does not indicate a radical change in the central bank's view that the overall domestic economy remains on a moderate pace of recovery. The top central banker, Lee Ju-yeol, also emphasized that the recovery is meeting up with its potential growth rate just now. Experts add that even though the growth outlook is lowered, it means the current economic fundamentals still support a mid-3% range growth this year. Service sector production and retail sales also picked up last month after declining in April, in a sign that the economy might be pulling out of a private spending slump caused by the ferry disaster. Guys?
Yeah, so then that isn't really the new growth outlook in a way, is it really? So brushing aside expectations for a growth supporting rate cut, at least in the near future then?
Yes, Mark. And as you mentioned earlier, the bank actually kept its key rate steady at 2.5% for this month, following its monthly monetary policy meeting today. And this comes after Finance Minister nominee Choi Kyung-hwan urged the Bank of Korea to seek easier monetary policies to spur growth. The yield for benchmark 3-year government bonds also hit a new annual low recently, reflecting market expectations for a downward interest rate adjustment. So it seems like the central bank is signaling the market that it will not be swayed by the government calls to cut the rate. This was Hwang Jie reporting live from the nation's central bank.
And meanwhile, over in the U.S., the Federal Reserve has set a tentative date for the end of its massive bond buying stimulus program.
Yes, the minutes of last month's policy meeting by the U.S. Federal Open Market Committee show that the Fed plans to end its bond purchases by this October, citing improvements in the U.S. economy. Fed officials also discussed how and when to raise interest rates, but were divided on the issue of inflation, which is a primary indicator of economic recovery. The Fed rolled back its bond buying program 3 times last year, citing improvements in economic activity and employment.
Now, if you want to buy a bag or a pair of shoes by a luxury brand but you can't afford it, you may be tempted to turn to counterfeit goods. But now there are efforts to apply international standards to the illegal production, consumption, and distribution of forged products. Kwon Soo-ah has the story.
These appear to be bazookas, the official football of the Brazil World Cup, but they are actually fakes. And all of them were smuggled into Korea from China. It's just one example of the growing market for counterfeit goods in Korea.
The list of more than 131,000 fake products confiscated since 2010 includes watches, bags, drugs, and ties like these.
Fighting the market for counterfeit products is an international problem. The global damage caused by counterfeiting amounts to around $600 billion annually. To tackle the issue, global experts are in Korea this week to find international standards for countermeasures against forged products, including authentication solutions, which are special techniques for preventing counterfeiting.
We're developing 2D and 3D barcode techniques and many other tools that make copying impossible. We are continuing with the registration of patents in order for our techniques to be recognized globally.
Hwang In-sa is one of the many private enterprises that specialize in techniques for preventing forged products, from intricate designs for labels, holograms, and watermarks, to invisible printing, which makes it possible to check the authenticity of a product through UV light. But the company says it's facing difficulties, as security techniques aren't as high a priority in Korea as they are in other countries.
Our company owns 2 patents, and each year we try to register more, but many times they have not been adopted.
The Korean Agency for Technology and Standards hopes that the introduction of international standards for authentication solutions will give a boost to SMEs in the security industry and make the fake market disappear. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Typhoon Noguri has now been downgraded to a typical typhoon from a super typhoon, and although Korea's southern Jeju Island is now free from the typhoon's influence, Japan has been hit hard, causing 2 deaths and widespread damage. Park Ji-won has more.
Typhoon Noguri swept upon the Japanese mainland on Thursday morning. The Japanese Meteorological Agency says the tropical storm center made landfall on Kyushu, southwestern Japan, at around 7 a.m. local time. Although downgraded to a typical typhoon late Wednesday from its earlier super typhoon status, the storm dumped torrential rain on Okinawa, Japan's southernmost prefecture. Nearly 200 millimeters of rain fell on Okinawa in just 3 hours on Wednesday. Nagano Prefecture in central Japan also saw roughly 70 millimeters of rain per hour, the heaviest rain recorded in the region in the month of July.
Torrential rain and flooding are forecast across the south and west due to the typhoon. We advise the public to take the necessary precautions against flooding and torrential rain. Please also be aware of strong gusty winds and high waves.
2 people have been killed due to the typhoon, a teenage boy during a landslide in central Japan, and an 83-year-old man swept into a swollen river in Fukushima. Some regional airports have been closed, and train services have been canceled in the hardest hit areas of Kyushu. Officials in Japan say the storm could still bring heavy rain and violent winds to eastern Japan, including Tokyo, by Friday. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The head coach of Korea's national football team has resigned, saying he was set on stepping down after the team's elimination from the Brazil World Cup. Just a week after the Korea Football Association suggested he stay until the end of his contract, which runs until the Asian Cup in January, Hong Myung-bo called a press conference to say he should be held responsible for the squad's poor performance in Brazil. Hong was criticised for only selecting players familiar to him for the World Cup, regardless of their form or fitness. And he recently came under fire for a land purchase made while prepping for the World Cup. Korea could only muster a single point, a draw against Russia, from their 3-game stay in Brazil. On the opposite end of the World Cup success scale, we now know the 2 teams that will be competing in Sunday's final. Argentina will face off against Germany in the repeat of the 1986 and 1990 finals after the South Americans beat the Netherlands 4-2 on penalties after they finished 0-0 after 120 minutes. Argentina's goalkeeper was the hero of the day, saving 2 of the Dutch players' penalties. Now, Germany will be the strong favourites in the final after they thrashed the host nation Brazil 7-1 in Tuesday's semi-final. Brazil and the Netherlands can't pack up and go home, though, as they still have to play the 3rd place playoff on Saturday local time. Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following on this Thursday lunchtime. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim, standing by at the news center.
Eunice, anger against Israel is mounting as the number of Palestinian deaths soars in the once again spiraling Middle East conflict.
You're absolutely right, Jinju. That death toll you mentioned of Palestinians being pounded on the ground now exceeds 60. Some media outlets saying more than 70 as Israel's army continued to bombard the Gaza Strip on the second day of its offensive. Palestinian militants also continue to shoot rockets deep into Israeli territory, deeper north than ever before. So far, though, no Israeli casualties have been reported. Meanwhile, the Israeli intelligence minister warned a ground operation could be imminent to, quote, temporarily cut off the strengthening of this terror army. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his army was ready for all possibilities, reiterating that Hamas will pay a heavy price for firing toward Israeli citizens. Now, earlier, Western-backed Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said what's happening was not a war between two armies and accused Israel of rejecting a proposed truce, adding that Palestinian factions in Gaza wanted to reach calm. In Iraq, bodies of 53 people were found in a mostly Shia town, raising ethnic and sectarian tensions in the ongoing battle for control of the historic state. The men were discovered in a field south of Baghdad, bound, blindfolded, and ridden with bullets. An investigation is underway to determine who they were and why they were killed. Meanwhile, in a fiery televised address, Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki accused the Kurdish minority of safeguarding ISIL militants, wreaking havoc in their quest to establish an Islamic State. He offered no evidence behind his claim that Kurdish-controlled Erbil province was becoming a rebel haven, further driving a wedge across ethnic lines despite pressure from the West to bridge the divisions to hold Iraq together. Protests, robbery, and vandalism in Brazil as anger boiled over its national team's humiliating World Cup defeat. The Brazilian team lost 1-7 to Germany in Wednesday's semifinal game. In reaction, demonstrators torched buses in neighborhoods inside and outside of Sao Paulo. Disappointed fans burned a Brazilian flag in an area usually packed by revelers. Police were on high alert and apprehended perpetrators, though there was no widespread rioting, as was feared by some. The Korean Foreign Ministry, meanwhile, has urged its citizens to avoid crowds and exercise caution. Russia's first post-Soviet rocket blasted into the sky Wednesday, the long-awaited result of 20 years of planning and development. The launch happened at a military spaceport in Russia's subarctic north at 4 p.m. Moscow time. The rocket successfully completed a 21-minute suborbital flight. It's called the Angara 1.2 PP and is a realization of Russia's first President Boris Yeltsin's order to break the space program's dependence on former Soviet republics. The relatively quiet affair came after the maiden flight, set for June 27th, was aborted seconds before due to a sudden pressure drop in the engine's oxidizer tank. The Angara is being called an eco-friendly rocket as it burns cleaner fuel than the rockets it's due to replace.
Good afternoon. Well, Typhoon Noguri swept the Kyushu, Japan this morning and it's still causing damages, but it should dissipate within 2 days, and the Korean peninsula shouldn't be affected by the storm today as the typhoon watches on Jeju Island have completely been lifted. But now we have to deal with the sweltering heat, and as we can see, the heat wave advisories have been issued in some areas in inland regions, including here in Seoul, and it should get sunnier as the day goes on, and temperatures will be hovering at over 30 degrees Celsius across the region. So please take good care of your health to prevent heat stroke and be careful to avoid food poisoning. So please do keep that in mind. And here are the readings for today. Well, the afternoon high in Seoul and Daegu will rise to 33 and 32, while Gwangju and Busan should see a high of 31 and 28 respectively. And for other regions, it looks like down on Jeju and Daejeon will peak to 27 and 33, while Dokdo sees a high of 26 this afternoon. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Thank you for watching.